A Great Argead Saga Alexein, Alexander the Great. Volume 2, Hieros Lochos, The Sacred Band. By Makāula Nakae. Episode 25, First Theban Rescue. Shadow over Thessaly. The air in Pammenes' study, usually a haven of quiet contemplation, hummed with a different kind of energy that afternoon. The scent of anxiety mingled with freshly unrolled parchment, a testament to the urgent matters at hand. Globes and scrolls depicting the jagged mountains and sun-baked plains of Thessaly lay scattered across the large oak table. Epaminondas, Thebes' foremost general, stood before a map, his customary serene composure replaced by a tight, almost predatory focus. His index finger traced the likely movements of Alexander of Pherae's forces with chilling precision. Philip perched on a stool beside the table, utterly captivated, while Antigonus, Peithon, Leonnatus, and Amyntor stood closely grouped near the arched doorway, their eyes darting across the tactical layouts. They watched Epaminondas with an intensity that belied their youth, absorbing every nuance of the grim discussion. Their position here, political hostages in the heart of the very city that held their homeland in its thrall, was an unlikely crucible for a burgeoning intellect. Opposite Epaminondas, Pammenes, ever the meticulous general, concluded his detailed report. "So, General, Alexander's cavalry incursions have increased dramatically," Pammenes stated, his voice a steady drone, masking a deeper current of concern. "He's not merely raiding for plunder now, he's systematically subjugating villages, nominally part of the Thessalian League, effectively daring us to respond. Larissa is under immense pressure. Their latest appeals are nearing demands. Look at how the map is split," Antigonus thought, his jaw tightening as he stared at the painted mountain passes. "If Thessaly falls to a tyrant like Alexander, the northern gateway to Macedonia is choked shut. Our kings back home are too busy bickering to see how fragile the whole regional balance truly is." Epaminondas' eyes, usually so thoughtful, were now cold, assessing the distant threat. "He is testing our resolve. After Pelopidas' last visit, he might have believed himself chastened. But a viper, once scotched, rarely learns." He turned his gaze, a flicker of his characteristic mentorship, softening his expression as he addressed Philip directly. "You see, Philip, a true tyrant will always push until he meets an unbreakable wall, or until he discerns an opportunity in perceived weakness. He speaks of tyrants as if they are equations to be solved," Peithon muttered inwardly, shifting his weight against the cool stone wall. "Yet every time Thebes flexes its muscle to crush a neighbor, it looks remarkably like the empires it claims to liberate." Leonnatus leaned slightly toward Amyntor, his voice dropping to a silent, imperceptible breath. "The invincible Thebans are stretched thin," Leonnatus thought, a cold, analytical thrill running through him. "If Epaminondas has to look north to fix this Thessalian mess, the garrison here weakens. Every map they draw is a blueprint for our own eventual escape." Amyntor crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing as he studied the intricate supply lines drawn across the parchment. "Do not underestimate them," Amyntor cautioned himself mentally, watching the way Epaminondas commanded the room without raising his voice. "A wounded lion is more dangerous than a sleeping one. They are teaching us how to conquer while holding us prisoner." In the crucible of Thebes, where the harsh realities of power politics intertwined with the relentless pursuit of military excellence, something profound and unexpected began to blossom between the city's foremost general and its young royal hostages. Epaminondas, a man whose life was a ceaseless devotion to Thebes, whose mind was a fortress of strategic thought and philosophical depth, found himself, to his quiet surprise, growing increasingly fond of young Prince Philip and the sharp-witted circle surrounding him. This unforeseen companionship began subtly, in the hours spent poring over maps in Pammenes' study, or during the early morning visits to the training grounds. Philip, initially an intensely observant shadow, a silent and inquisitive presence, soon began to ask questions alongside Antigonus and Peithon. They weren't mere casual inquiries, but pointed, probing questions born of a sharp intellect that often startled Epaminondas. The boys absorbed complex military concepts, the intricate nuances of the oblique order, and the logistical challenges of distant campaigns with a frightening speed. They didn't just listen, they processed, connecting disparate ideas, and sometimes, with a respectful hesitancy, they even posed hypothetical counterarguments that forced Epaminondas to clarify his reasoning, finding an unexpected, almost youthful joy in the intellectual sparring. This unusual bond gave Epaminondas a sense of freshness, a lightness he hadn't realized was missing from his austere existence. The relentless demands of statecraft typically consumed his days, along with the immense burden of military command and the often mundane squabbles of the Boeotarchs. His peers, while loyal and undoubtedly competent, rarely possessed the same breadth of philosophical inquiry or the sheer unburdened curiosity of youth. In Philip and his companions, Epaminondas discovered not just brilliant minds but truly eager and receptive vessels for his accumulated wisdom, unique intellectual companions in a lonely world of war. Thus, almost imperceptibly, Epaminondas fully embraced the role of mentor and teacher. He found himself dedicating more and more time to the young Macedonian princes and nobles, sharing insights gleaned from decades of campaigning. He delved beyond the mere house of battle into the profound whys, the intricate political calculations, the psychological warfare against an enemy's will, and the delicate balance between overwhelming force and cunning diplomacy. He meticulously taught them about logistical foresight and the unwavering discipline required not just on the battlefield, but also in the quiet solitude of command. Their discussions range from Xenophon's meticulous accounts of cavalry tactics to Homer's epic heroes, and even to Plato's lofty ideals of the perfect state, weaving these diverse threads into a rich tapestry of knowledge. There was a unique satisfaction in seeing complex ideas click into place behind Philip's keen eyes, and watching the boys' minds expand, already anticipating stratagems that few men twice their age could conceive. As the months wore on and the young northerners' bodies began to stretch and harden from the rigorous Theban training, a deeper, more profound emotion began to stir within Epaminondas. He, who had never married and had reportedly eschewed personal attachments for the sake of Thebes, began to look upon these intelligent, earnest youths with a sort of paternal guardianship. It was not literal fatherhood, but a profound affection, a deep-seated pride in witnessing their intellectual and personal growth. He saw in them not just promising minds, but potential architects of a new Mediterranean order, vessels through which his legacy of strategic thought might continue, perhaps even flourish beyond the narrow confines of Thebes itself. This burgeoning bond was an anomaly, a quiet warmth in the otherwise cold, calculating world of ancient Greek power. Epaminondas, the Stoic general, found genuine joy in nurturing this exceptional talent, seeing in Philip and his circle a raw brilliance that transcended the immediate political tensions between Macedon and Thebes. Amid the constant military and political crises that defined Thebes' hegemony, the time spent with these young princes became a precious solace. In this quiet, shared space, the future of Hellas was not debated in the clamor of council, but shaped in the shared pursuit of knowledge between a wise old lion and a hungry young pack. Just as Pammenes began to detail the logistical challenges of a renewed campaign inside the study, a frantic pounding erupted at the door. A young runner, sweat-soaked and gasping for breath, burst in, ignoring all protocol. He held a small leather-bound message pouch, its seal bearing the crest of a Thessalian allied city but torn and disfigured. General Epaminondas. A message. Urgent. From Thessaly, the runner choked out, swaying on his feet. Epaminondas moved with surprising speed, snatching the pouch. He broke the seal with a decisive flick of his thumb, his eyes scanning the hastily scrawled message. As he read, his face, usually a mask of calm, hardened. A flicker of profound disbelief, then a terrible, cold rage crossed his features. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the parchment. Pammenes, seeing the shift, stepped forward. General? What news? Epaminondas slowly lowered the message, his gaze rising to meet Pammenes's. His voice, when it came, was a low, dangerous growl. Alexander of Pherae. He has broken all sacred laws of hospitality. He has committed an act of unspeakable treachery. He paused, his eyes now blazing with a fury Philip had never witnessed in him. He has captured Pelopidas. Our Pelopidas. Taken him hostage. The words hung in the air like a death knell. Philip felt a jolt, as if struck by lightning. Pelopidas, the man who had ridden with him from Macedon, who had quelled the chaos of the north, the founder of the sacred band, was captured. It seemed impossible. Pammenes' face, usually so composed, contorted in a rare moment of shock and disbelief. Captured? Pammenes repeated, his voice barely a whisper. How? When? Epaminondas stared at the blood-sealed dispatch, his fingers trembling, not with fear, but with a cold, terrifying fury that froze the blood in the veins of everyone standing in the chamber. By trickery, Epaminondas spat, his voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss that shook the very air. At a parley, with a handful of guards. He relied on the sanctity of their meeting, on the eternal laws of gods and men, on the very name of a guest friend. And that butcher of Pherae, that rabid beast, sprang a trap. He crushed the parchment into a tight, jagged ball within his fist, his knuckles turning stark white. This is not right, Epaminondas thought, a dark, suffocating wave of anger crashing over his disciplined mind. This is an abomination. A violation of every sacred trust that holds our fractured world together. To murder the laws of Hellas in cold blood and chain the finest man in Thebes like a common criminal. This cannot stand, Epaminondas said aloud, stepping forward as the very air around him seemed to crackle with absolute, unyielding resolve. This affront to Thebes, to the sacred laws of Hellas, to decency itself, it is intolerable. Epaminondas stood frozen for a long, agonizing moment, his chest heaving as the crushing weight of the dispatch settled over him. Unlike the raw, incandescent fury that usually drove men to rash vengeance, a terrifying, unnatural stillness settled over his features. No, Epaminondas thought, his eyes locked on the crumpled parchment in his hand as a cold sweat broke across his brow. If I let anger dictate the drumbeat of this march, Pelopidas dies. Alexander knows we are coming. If we rush blindly across the Thessalian border with fire and steel, the tyrant will execute his hostage before our vanguard even crosses the frontier. He slowly lowered his hand, his jaw working as he wrestled back the violent impulse to summon the levies and strike at dawn. Stop, Pammenes, Epaminondas said, his voice terrifyingly quiet, entirely devoid of the explosive rage the general usually carried. Pammenes, halfway to the door, froze and spun around, staring at him in utter bewilderment. Stop? General, are you saying we let this stand? We must ride before Alexander realizes we know. We will ride, yes, Epaminondas replied, pacing slowly toward the map table, his mind already calculating the ruthless geometry of survival and rescue. But not with raw fury, and not at dawn. A hasty march is a tyrant's playground. Alexander wants us to panic. He wants us to throw an uncoordinated force across his borders, so he can use Pelopidas as a shield or a bargaining chip to break our federation. Epaminondas slammed his palm flat against the wood of the map table, his dark eyes burning with a cold, absolute resolve. We will not march blindly, Epaminondas continued, his tone chillingly deliberate. We will draft a mobilization so vast and methodical that it blankets Thessaly before Alexander can even draw breath. We will secure our flanks, lock down the League, and prepare a trap so total that when we reach Pherae, Alexander will have nowhere to run and no time to spill a single drop of our brother's blood. Move with cold precision, Pammenes. Haste makes graves. We play this by masterstroke, not by madness. Across the room, Antigonus dropped his bronze greave with a sharp, metallic clang. Taken? Antigonus thought, his jaw tightening as he stared across the floor. Pelopidas, the conqueror of the north, captured by a petty Thessalian tyrant. The whole foundation of their hegemony is shaking right now. If Thebes stumbles, the balance of power across all of Greece shifts. Peithon and Leonnatus exchanged a sharp, calculating look. The invincible Thebans are bleeding, Leonnatus thought, a cold, analytical thrill running through him. If Pelopidas is in a dungeon and Epaminondas is forced to react, Thebes will overextend. Our chance at freedom won't come from waiting. It will come from the chaos they are about to step into. Amyntor, sitting quietly in the corner examining a map fragment, shook his head slowly. Do not underestimate Epaminondas, Amyntor thought, his eyes narrowing. A wounded lion is more dangerous than a sleeping one. If they march north, they will leave a vacuum here. We must watch every move the magistrates make. Philip, his heart pounding, finally found his voice. He had seen Epaminondas in council, had witnessed his strategic genius. But this was different. This was raw fury, transformed into immediate, decisive action. General Epaminondas, Philip burst out, rising abruptly from his stool. Around him, Antigonus stiffened, his hand instinctively twitching toward his side. while Peithon and Leonnatus exchanged sharp, wide-eyed glances. Does he realize what he's doing? Antigonus thought, his chest tightening in sudden alarm. Interrupting Epaminondas when the general's eyes are like cold iron. He's courting disaster. Let him speak, Leonnatus thought, a faint, critical smirk touching his lips as he watched Philip step forward. A caged prince begging for a taste of real war. Let us see how the great Theban handles a royal demanding a place in the line. Take me with you. Please, Philip pleaded, his young face alight with desperate eagerness, a yearning to participate in this grand, heroic response. He imagined himself riding alongside Epaminondas, witnessing the liberation firsthand, an active participant in Theban glory. I have observed the maneuvers and trained with your men. I can be useful. He thinks war is a Homeric epic, Amyntor thought quietly from the corner, shaking his head with a mixture of sympathy and caution. He doesn't see the blood on the map yet. Epaminondas turned, his eyes still ablaze with the storm of his anger, but now a flicker of something else, perhaps pity, perhaps wisdom, passed through them as he looked at the impassioned boy. He walked to Philip and placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, a gesture that was both firm and denying. No, Philip, Epaminondas said, his voice surprisingly gentle amidst the roar of his fury, yet utterly unyielding. You will not come. Philip's face fell. But, General, listen to me, Epaminondas interrupted, his gaze piercing. Your place is here, in Thebes, with Pammenes. You do not have the luxury of leaving here for Thessaly and returning. You will lose more than a month of training and education. This is not a campaign for glory, boy. This is a rescue. A precise, dangerous endeavor against a ruthless tyrant who knows no rules. It will be bloody. It will be unforgiving. And it demands the most experienced hands, those who understand every nuance of risk. He squeezed Philip's shoulder. Your value, Prince, is not on this battlefield. Not yet. Your path lies in learning, in observing, in understanding why such actions are necessary and how to ensure they do not happen again. You will stay. You will continue your studies with Pammenes. You will train. You will absorb every lesson Thebes has to offer. That is your mission. That is how you will truly be useful to Hellas and to your own future. The words, though a denial, held a weight of undeniable authority. Epaminondas was not merely dismissing him. He was assigning him a deeper, more profound task. Philip looked into the general's eyes, seeing not just the fire of vengeance, but the cold, complex logic of a true strategist. He swallowed, the taste of disappointment bitter but mixed with a strange sense of respect. He is right, Antigonus admitted to himself, watching the exchange closely. A reckless prince on a rescue mission would only be a liability. Epaminondas is thinking like a king, even if he hates the title. Epaminondas gave Philip's shoulder a final, firm squeeze, then turned and strode out of the room, his stride purposeful, already shifting his mind from the raw shock of betrayal to the intricate calculations of war. The silence he left behind was filled with the distant sounds of Thebes stirring to action, the excited shouts of men, the clatter of arms. Philip stood there, watching the empty doorway, the heavy handprint of Epaminondas still seeming to weigh on his shoulder. He was a prince, a hostage, a student. And for now, his battlefield was the knowledge contained within the scrolls, the discipline of the training ground, and the bitter patience required to wait unlearn. Later, Epaminondas sought out Philip in the quiet of the training grounds, the scent of sweat and oiled leather hanging heavy in the air. The news of Pelopidas's capture had spread like wildfire, a chilling whisper through the city. Epaminondas's face was grim, etched with a mix of anger and profound concern. Nearby, Antigonus, Peithon, Leonnatus, and Amyntor lingered at a respectful distance, watching the encounter unfold with rapt attention. Even now, amidst a crisis that could shatter the League, the general comes to test the boy, Peithon thought, crossing his arms. They treat these northern princes not as prisoners but as apprentices to power. Philip, Epaminondas began, his voice low, his gaze piercing. I just cannot go there at this point, through all of this, to rescue him from being captured. My duties here are too pressing. The Boeotian League stability, the Spartan threats, they demand my immediate attention. Pelopidas is not dead, I believe, probably alive in a dungeon. They won't kill him for nothing, not yet. He is too valuable a hostage. But this situation, it is a grave test for Thebes. He paused, his eyes fixed on the young prince. Philip, if you were in my position, tasked with dealing with this crisis, what would you do? Philip, though young, held Epaminondas' gaze steadily. He had spent his time in Thebes not just observing, but absorbing. He understood the ruthless calculus of power. Now he speaks as a sovereign, Leonnatus thought, leaning forward slightly, curious to hear what the Macedonian hostage would dare advise the master of Thebes. General, Philip replied, his voice calm, though a flicker of his innate ambition shone in his eyes. One must prioritize. Dealing with the immediate Theban internal issues versus rescuing Pelopidas, what is truly more urgent for the state? If the general is alive and they won't kill him immediately, then resolving our internal vulnerabilities should be the paramount priority. A rescue expedition, even with a trusted, experienced general and his team, would draw away vital resources and manpower that Thebes cannot afford to lose if its foundations are shaking. Internal affairs are imminent. If Thebes itself breaks apart, rescuing him will be harder and the cost far greater in the long run. Perhaps a diplomatic approach first, to gauge his condition and the tyrant's demands, while we solidify our home front. The heavy wooden doors of the barracks slammed open, and a junior messenger from the magistrate's hall stumbled into the long, smoke-hazed room. He was covered in dust, his chest heaving as if he had run the entire length of the Cadmea without drawing breath. "The general!" the messenger gasped, his voice cracking into the cavernous hall. "Pelopidas has fallen into a trap. Captured by Alexander of Pherae." The sound of irons scraping against whetstones died instantly. The loud, boisterous chatter of dozens of older cadets vanished as if swallowed by a vacuum. In the sudden dead silence, the crackle of the hearth fire sounded unnaturally loud. Iolaus, 17 and standing near the central pillar, with a sharpening stone in hand, completely stopped breathing. The stone slipped from his fingers, hitting the packed dirt floor with a dull thud that seemed to echo off the stone walls. Pelopidas? Iolaus thought, a cold knot tightening in his chest. The co-founder of the Sacred Band, the man who brought us peace from the north, taken by a petty tyrant? If Pelopidas can be caught by a trick, no one in Greece is safe. Beside him, Agis, 15, froze mid-stride, a bronze greave clutched in his grip. His face drained of color as his mind raced. Captured at a parley? They didn't even fall in a fair fight. If the Cadmea loses its heroes, the whole shield wall of Thebes will start to crack. Sinain, 16, dropped his practice sword onto the wooden bench, his eyes wide with disbelief. The invincible Thebans, bleeding from a coward's trap, Sinain thought, his jaw clenching so hard his teeth ached. The north is unraveling, and we are trapped right in the center of the storm. Further down the long rows of bunks, Lochos, 14, stopped dead, his lungs refusing to draw air for a terrifying second. He stared blankly at the wall, a sudden, frantic wave of panic washing over him. If Pelopidas is in a dungeon, what happens to the treaty? What happens to us? Are we still honored guests, or are we now valuable hostages in a city about to go to war? Battus, 14, who had been leaning against the heavy oak table mapping out morning formations, felt the blood drain from his face. The little ones, Battus thought, his heart hammering against his ribs as he immediately thought of the younger boys across the courtyards. If the city panics, the guards will lock every gate tighter. The children will be trapped in the dark with no one to protect them. Around them, the rest of the barracks stood frozen in stunned silence, the collective weight of the news pressing down like an iron vault. In the span of a single heartbeat, the carefree bravado of youth was stripped away, leaving only the grim, chilling reality of a world plunging into war. Are we going to war? Rescuing General Pelopidas? A voice broke the stillness from the back of the room. Who is going to rescue General Pelopidas and Ismenias? Another cadet muttered, his voice tight with disbelief. Probably General Epaminondas, a third answered grimly, and our Sacred Band. The news of Pelopidas's capture struck Thebes like a thunderbolt, shattering the city's proud composure. A collective gasp of outrage and disbelief rippled through the streets, quickly hardening into a fierce demand for action. How could their beloved hero, the liberator of Thebes, the victor of Leuctra, be held captive by a petty tyrant like Alexander of Pherae? The insult was unbearable. And with Pelopidas, Ismenias, another respected Theban, had also been seized, compounding the humiliation. They had gone to Thessaly as ambassadors without a military force, expecting to negotiate only to be treacherously thrown into Alexander's dungeons. Far from the shouting assemblies and the hurried marshalling of troops in the lower city, the evening meal in the quiet peristyle courtyard of Argead's estate was usually a sanctuary of muted dignity. But tonight, the shadow of Thessaly fell heavily over the low wooden dining tables. Argead, the veteran hoplite, sat at the head of the bench, his weathered face carved into a grim, unreadable mask as he stared down at his wine cup. Beside him, his wife Gorgo quietly tended to the younger foreign wards, Cletus, whose dark, unruly hair fell over a bowl of unspiced barley, Phormio, Cylon, and Lysias, while across the courtyard, Timoclea and her son, Ariston, sat with Pelopidas's other foster wards, Corhugus, Manilius, Simmias, and Polemon. The usual restless chatter of the children had died down, replaced by an uneasy, stifling quiet. Even the younger boys sensed the sudden violent shift in the air of the household. Ariston sat rigidly on his stool, his fingers gripping the edge of the wood so tightly his knuckles turned white. His eyes darted across the courtyard to his mother, Timoclea. She had not touched her food. Her bowl of roasted lentils remained untouched, her gaze fixed entirely on the bronze oil lamp flickering against the stone pillar. "Mother," Ariston finally broke the silence, his young voice cracking with a sudden, sharp tremor. "Is it true? The couriers in the street, they were shouting that my father has been taken." Timoclea slowly raised her head. The fierce, unyielding resolve that usually defined her features had cracked, revealing a deep, terrifying fracture of dread. She looked at her son, 13, standing on the threshold of manhood, desperate for reassurance she could not honestly give. "It is true, Ariston," Timoclea said, her voice dropping to a fragile whisper that barely carried across the quiet peristyle. Corhugus dropped his wooden spoon with a sharp clatter against the stone floor. Simmias and Polemon pressed closer to Timoclea's knees, their wide, fearful eyes reflecting the dancing flames of the lamps. At the other end of the space, little Cletus stopped chewing, looking up sharply at the sound of the general's name, sensing the terror rippling through the adults. Ariston stood up so abruptly his stool scraped harshly against the flags. "Taken? By whom?" "By that beast in Pherae." "Why isn't Epaminondas marching? Why aren't our soldiers already tearing his walls down?" Anger, hot and frantic, flushed across the boy's face. "He's my father. They can't leave him in a dungeon." "Sit down," Ariston, Argead commanded, his voice deep, gravelly, and heavy, with the weary burden of a soldier who had seen too many wars begin in arrogance and end in ash. The veteran looked up, his scarred cheek twitching as he met the boy's furious gaze. "Anger will not unlock iron gates. Epaminondas is pinned to the southern frontier by Spartan threats. He cannot simply abandon the League's foundation without risking the whole of Boeotia. General Chabrias and Asopus are raising the expedition now. But make no mistake, a rescue forced in haste is a dangerous thing." Timoclea stood up, walking swiftly around the low table to pull her son into her arms. She buried her face in Ariston's dark hair, holding him with a fierce, trembling desperation that betrayed how deeply the news had shaken her. He went to parley in good faith, Timoclea thought, her heart twisting with a cold, sickening dread. He trusted in diplomacy, and they threw him into a pit like an animal. "Listen to me, Ariston," Timoclea whispered fiercely against his ear, pulling back just enough to force her son to look into her eyes. "Your father is Pelopidas. He survived the Spartan occupation. He overthrew tyrants when everyone else knelt. He is not broken easily. But we must be strong. We cannot afford panic here, not within these walls, and not in the city." Ariston swallowed hard, the hot tears stinging his eyes, which he stubbornly blinked away. He nodded stiffly, pressing his forehead against his mother's shoulder. Across the courtyard, Gorgo quietly reached out, drawing little Cletus into the shelter of her arm. The 5-year-old buried his face in the coarse wool of her tunic, his small frame trembling as he whispered a frightened, broken question about when his older brothers would finally come back from the barracks. In the heart of Thebes, beneath the flickering glow of bronze oil lamps, under a divided, bruised evening sky, the children wept softly for homes they feared they would never see again. The wives prayed silently into the dark for husbands lost to the northern frontier, and the ancient city braced itself for a war born of pure treachery. In the immediate aftermath, a desperate energy seized the Theban council. There was no time for the measured deliberation that Epaminondas so often favored. He still deeply engaged in the delicate political dance of consolidating gains in the Peloponnese and managing the Boeotian League's internal affairs, could not be recalled immediately. The urgency was paramount. The city's honor, its very reputation as the protector of Hellas, demanded swift retribution. Thus, a rescue expedition was hastily assembled. With Pelopidas and Ismenias both captive and Epaminondas unavailable, the mantle of command fell to other Theban generals, competent men indeed, but lacking the unique brilliance and authority of the two great comrades. Men like Chabrias and Asopus, though seasoned, found themselves stepping into a void left by their absent peers. Heavy footsteps echoed against the flags of the peristyle archway. Epaminondas stepped into the courtyard, his presence sweeping in like a cold draft. Beside him walked Pammenes and Cephisodoros, their expressions etched with the grim fatigue of a council plunged into sudden crisis. Trailing closely behind them were the older cadets and royal wards Philip, Antigonus, Peithon, Leonnatus, and Amyntor, their eyes wide, drinking in the tense, suffocating atmosphere of the estate. Timoclea stepped forward from the low dining table, her gaze locked onto Epaminondas' face with a look of desperate maternal dread. Beside her, 13-year-old Ariston gripped his mother's arm, his voice cracking as he confronted the general. "General Epaminondas," Timoclea breathed, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Do you think," Ariston swallowed hard, his young voice trembling in the heavy air, "do you think my father is still alive?" Epaminondas stopped. He looked down at the boy, seeing the exact mirror of Pelopidas's fierce, unyielding eyes staring back at him. The general's face softened into a solemn, granite-firm reassurance. "The boy looks for certainty in a world built on blood and politics, Epaminondas thought, his own chest tightening with a private, suffocating grief for his captured brother in arms. I must give him strength, even when the margins are razor-thin. It is highly probable that Pelopidas is alive, Ariston," Epaminondas answered, his deep, resonant voice cutting clearly through the courtyard silence. "He is too valuable a prize to be discarded. A tyrant like Alexander does not slaughter a general of Thebes outright. He hoards him, uses him as a shield, and trades him for leverage. If they were to execute Pelopidas and Ismenias now, it would invite an absolute, unrelenting annihilation upon Pherae. Alexander wants power, not suicide. He is calculating the tyrant's greed," Philip thought, standing quietly behind Epaminondas, his mind racing as he observed the general's unshakable composure under fire. A hostage's life is currency. If the currency is too expensive to spend, the captor must bargain. My own position here, it is the exact same game. Across the stone flags, the younger boys, Cletus, Phormio, Simmias, Polemon, Cylon, Manilius, Lysias, and Corhugus, suddenly caught sight of Philip and the older boys standing among the shadows. With a collective cry of desperate relief, the little ones broke away from the dining tables, sprinting across the courtyard to throw their arms around their brothers' and cousins' legs, burying their tear-stained faces in tunics, and sobbing with the raw abandon of children, who thought they had been completely abandoned. Antigonus stiffened slightly as little Phormio collided with his shins, wrapping small arms tightly around his thighs. They are terrified, Antigonus thought, looking down at the shaking child with a rare, protective surge in his chest. The adults play their grand games of hegemony and war, but it is the children who pay the price in the dark. Peithon and Leonnatus knelt down, awkwardly patting the shoulders of the younger wards, their cynical detachment momentarily shattered by the raw grief of the little ones. Little Cletus grasped the hem of Philippus' tunic, looking up with wide, troubled eyes. General Pelopidas brought us here as hostages, and now he's a hostage in Pherae. I thought the general was the lion of Thebes. Nobody can capture the lion. What went wrong? Philip knelt down to meet the 5-year-old's gaze, his expression softening. It is confusing, yes. The Thessalian tyrant ambushed them during a parley. Remember? Cletus sniffled, his brow furrowing. They took our supply and foods. Not just food, Philip corrected gently, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. The tyrant didn't play fair. He broke the sacred laws of the gods. General Pelopidas didn't go there to fight with an army. He went for a meeting, a peaceful negotiation. He trusted their word, and the tyrant used that trust against him. Cletus twisted his small face in deep confusion. The tyrant lied to the general, and the general believed him. So who is smarter, the one who lies or the one who trusts? Philip paused, taking a moment to find the right words for a 5-year-old wrestling with the harsh realities of power. Cletus, Philip said quietly, if you lie to get what you want and keep doing it over and over again, eventually no person of honor will ever trust you. You make enemies everywhere. In the end, a man like that cannot survive among the very people he has betrayed. He's left entirely alone, or someone finally kills him for his treachery. Amidst the chorus of quiet weeping, Argead, the veteran hoplite, stepped forward from the colonnade, leaning heavily on his spear. His weathered face was shadowed with dark skepticism. I assume you cannot leave Thebes at this critical hour to command the rescue yourself? Epaminondas, Argead rumbled, his voice grating like stone against stone. So tell me, who will go? Pammenes stepped up, his expression tight. General Chabrias and his team are mustering at dawn. They know the Thessalian terrain. Argead narrowed his eyes, shifting his grip on his spear shaft. And if Chabrias fails? Silence fell over the courtyard, heavier and colder than before. Even the small children stopped crying, sensing the monumental gravity of the question hanging in the damp evening air. Epaminondas stepped forward, his gaze hardening into something terrifyingly absolute. If Chabrias falls short against the Viper's walls, Epaminondas thought, his mind leaping past diplomacy, past politics, straight to the ultimate sacrifice, Thebes will bear its true fangs. We pray to the gods for Chabrias' success, Epaminondas said, his voice dropping to a low, chilling register that left no room for doubt. But if General Chabrias fails, I will march north myself, at the head of the sacred band, with the full, crushing weight of Thebes behind us. And nothing on this earth will save Pherae from the fire. To be continued in episode 26, Faltered Spear. Watch and listen now. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Talesia's Playlist. Volume 2, Hieros Lochos, the Sacred Band Playlist. Bookmark Volume 1, Divine Oracle Playlist. Join the Vanguard. A new episode drops every single day until the epic conclusion of Volume 2. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Subscribe to follow the bloody rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our Vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below.